Taiwan has undoubtedly become one of the most significant geopolitical flashpoints of the 21st century, especially concerning the relationship between the United States and China. At the heart of this dispute is the issue of Taiwan's sovereignty. China views the island as a rebellious province that must, at some point, be reunified with the mainland. Taiwan, on the other hand, while not having formally declared independence, operates as a sovereign state with its own government, economy, and military. For the U.S., ensuring Taiwan's autonomy is a strategic priority, both in terms of maintaining the balance of power in Asia and defending democratic values. The tension between China and Taiwan is not new. Since the 1940s, when Chinese nationalists retreated to Taiwan after being defeated by the communists in the Chinese Civil War, the island has been a symbol of resistance to Beijing's regime. However, in recent decades, the dispute over Taiwan has intensified, largely due to China's growing influence and military might. Today, U.S. military leaders and defense experts have sounded alarms over the possibility of a U.S.-China war over Taiwan. Many American military officials believe such a conflict could occur between 2025 and 2027, a prediction that has been echoed as tensions escalate. The logic behind these forecasts lies in China's rapid military advancement and Beijing's increasing assertiveness in territorial matters. Taiwan, with its strategic location in the South China Sea and its global economic importance, particularly as a leader in semiconductor production, is seen as a potential flashpoint for direct confrontation between two of the world's most powerful nations. China's expanding military capabilities are evident. The country is undergoing the largest naval and military buildup since World War II. The Chinese military, known as the People's Liberation Army, PLA, has undergone massive modernization over the past 2 decades. This includes the development of advanced technologies like hypersonic missiles and 5th-generation fighter jets, as well as building a navy that has already surpassed that of the US in terms of the number of ships. China has also invested heavily in cyber capabilities and artificial intelligence, placing its military force on a level of direct rivalry with the United States. China's focus on Taiwan has become even more apparent with recent military maneuvers around the island, which include invasion simulations and naval blockades. These military exercises are a show of force, signaling that Beijing is preparing for military action if Taiwan were to formally declare independence or if the US were to increase its military support for the island. The question that remains is, are we on the brink of an inevitable conflict between the world's 2 largest powers over Taiwan? To understand the complexity of the conflict surrounding Taiwan, it is necessary to go back to the late 1940s, when China was torn apart by a historic struggle between the Chinese Communist Party, led by Mao Zedong, and the Kuomintang, led by Chiang Kai-shek. After the Communists won in 1949, the People's Republic of China was proclaimed on the mainland, while the nationalists retreated to Taiwan and established their own government. Since then, China and Taiwan have been locked in a political stalemate, as there has never been a formal peace treaty between the two. This historical context forms the basis of China's current One China policy, which asserts that Taiwan is an integral part of its territory. Beijing views the island as a province that, in the future, must be reunified, whether peacefully or, if necessary, through strategic measures. The Chinese government has repeatedly signaled that reunification could include military action if diplomacy fails, though it currently prioritizes diplomatic and economic means to achieve this goal. The One China policy directly affects Taiwan's international relations. Only a few countries formally recognize Taiwan as a sovereign state. Most, including the US, adhere to the One China policy, recognizing Beijing as the legitimate government of China but maintaining unofficial ties with Taiwan. This diplomatic ambiguity allows Taiwan to function as a de facto state, with its own government and military, without formally declaring independence. Taiwan avoids formally declaring independence because doing so would likely be seen as a violation of the One China policy, potentially provoking strategic consequences from Beijing. This delicate balance, known as strategic ambiguity, has kept peace in the region for decades, despite periodic tensions. The island continues to strengthen its defenses and forge stronger relationships with international allies, particularly the US, without crossing Beijing's red lines. On the other hand, China has been preparing for any potential scenario involving Taiwan, investing heavily in its military power. Beijing's military drills, particularly the simulations and naval exercises around Taiwan, have increased pressure on the island, signaling that peaceful solutions are Beijing's preference but that more extreme measures are not off the table. Taiwan, in turn, continues to fight for space on the international stage and for its autonomy. The situation is a delicate balancing act, with both sides trying to avoid an escalation that could destabilize the region. The island remains a symbol of resistance against the expansion of Beijing's power but is keenly aware of the need to tread carefully, relying on the support of its allies to secure its safety and future. For the United States, Taiwan represents a critical strategic interest in Asia. Not only does Taiwan's autonomy serve as a counterbalance to Chinese influence in the region, but the US also sees it as a key part of defending democratic values in the face of authoritarianism. The US maintains a policy of strategic ambiguity with Taiwan, not formally committing to defend the island but providing military support and ensuring that it has the capability to deter Chinese aggression. At the same time, Taiwan's role as a leader in the global semiconductor industry makes it economically indispensable. A conflict over Taiwan could disrupt global supply chains, particularly for advanced technologies, which are crucial for industries worldwide. While both the US and China are aware of the catastrophic consequences of a direct military confrontation, the increasing assertiveness of both powers around Taiwan raises concerns about the potential for miscalculation. As the US continues to affirm its commitment to ensuring freedom of navigation in the South China Sea and supporting its allies in the Indo-Pacific, any significant shift in Taiwan's status could spark a conflict with far-reaching global consequences. The world is watching closely, as the decisions made by both China and the US in the coming years will shape not only the future of Taiwan but also the broader geopolitical landscape of the 21st century. In the face of growing military and political pressure from China, Taiwan has adopted a multifaceted approach to deter any invasion attempts, combining diplomacy, economic power, and military defense. These strategies are critical to ensuring its security and maintaining the balance of power in a region where tensions between Taipei and Beijing are escalating. In diplomatic terms, Taiwan adheres to a strategy of calculated ambiguity, formally maintaining the One China policy, the notion that Taiwan is technically part of China's territory. While this avoids direct provocation and a possible military response from Beijing, Taiwan continues to strengthen its distinct national identity. By refraining from formally declaring independence, Taiwan preserves the status quo and, with it, its autonomy. However, in recent years, Taiwanese identity has become increasingly separate from the mainland, with growing nationalist sentiment among the local population. Taiwan has sought to reinforce its ties with Western democracies and its allies in Asia while avoiding actions that could lead to immediate escalation. Economically, Taiwan holds one of the most powerful cards in its hand, the semiconductor industry. The island is a global hub for microchip manufacturing, led by the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC, the world's largest and most advanced producer of semiconductors. This global dependency on chips produced in Taiwan is referred to as the Silicon Shield. TSMC provides essential microchips for the global economy, powering everything from smartphones to advanced military systems. Both the United States and China rely on Taiwan's factories for their technological supply chains. This economic interdependence means that a potential invasion of Taiwan would have global repercussions, destabilizing the economies of major powers and triggering a technological production crisis. Taiwan's economic strength thus acts as a shield, discouraging direct conflict that would destabilize global markets and harm the powers reliant on these products. On the military front, Taiwan has been investing heavily in defense to make any Chinese invasion extremely difficult. The Taiwanese government has adopted a military strategy focused on asymmetric defense, strengthening its coastal defenses and developing guerrilla tactics to complicate a potential amphibious invasion by China. Aware of China's significant military advantage, Taiwan prepares to resist as long as possible, hoping that in the event of a conflict, the time gained through internal defense would allow for international assistance, particularly from the U.S. The island has invested in defensive weapons, such as anti-aircraft and anti-ship missile systems, while bolstering its reserve forces and military training for urban combat in the event of a Chinese landing. The goal is to raise the costs and risks of an invasion, making the operation long and grueling for the invader. These three fronts, diplomacy, economy, and military defense, form the foundation of Taiwan's strategy to avoid a Chinese invasion, creating a complex balance between cooperation, internal resilience, and military preparedness. What remains uncertain is how long Taiwan can maintain this balance in the face of an increasingly assertive and militarily prepared China. Among the various strategies Taiwan employs to protect itself from a potential Chinese invasion, one of the most powerful lies not in its armed forces or diplomatic alliances, but in its semiconductor industry. In recent years, Taiwan has become the world's largest producer of microchips, essential for the functioning of nearly all modern electronic devices. This has turned the island into an economically vital player for global powers, creating what many call the Silicon Shield, an economic factor that, in practice, helps deter direct military action from China. Taiwan produces about 68% of all global semiconductors and is responsible for over 90% of the world's most advanced chips, which power cutting-edge technologies like artificial intelligence, military defense systems, consumer electronics, and smart cars. The key to this leadership is TSMC, the largest chip manufacturer in the world. The global economy's reliance on Taiwan's production is so great that any disruption to this supply would have catastrophic consequences, affecting entire sectors of technology and industry. This critical role in the global semiconductor supply chain creates a powerful economic incentive for powers like the United States, Europe, and Japan to protect Taiwan from a possible Chinese invasion. If Taiwan's chip production were interrupted or captured by Beijing, the economic impact would be devastating, leading to a disruption of electronic and technological products worldwide and triggering an unprecedented crisis. Companies like Apple, Nvidia, Qualcomm, and many other Silicon Valley giants directly depend on the advanced chips manufactured in Taiwan for their products, making the island's stability a matter of global economic and strategic interest. The United States, besides being one of Taiwan's largest technological partners, also views semiconductor production as a matter of national security. A conflict that disrupts this flow of microchips would affect not only the technology industry but also the U.S. military's production capabilities, which use Taiwan semiconductors in various advanced defense technologies. This puts Taiwan at the center of a power struggle between the U.S. and China, where the global economy plays a crucial role in deterrence strategies. Europe and Japan, two economies heavily dependent on semiconductors for their automotive and technology sectors, also have strong incentives to keep Taiwan out of Chinese control. Germany's high-tech automotive production, for instance, and Japan's technological advances are directly tied to the continued supply of Taiwanese semiconductors. Any disruption in this flow would threaten key industries, creating a global crisis of enormous proportions. Interestingly, China, which is seeking to consolidate its technological independence, also depends on Taiwanese semiconductors for its own industry. While Beijing has made massive investments in research and development to achieve self-sufficiency in chip production, the country still lacks the capacity to manufacture advanced semiconductors on the same scale and quality as Taiwan. This creates a paradoxical situation. Despite seeing Taiwan as part of its territory, China knows that an immediate invasion of the island would, at least in the short term, negatively impact its own economy and technological sector. The dependency on Taiwanese chips generates a shield effect that temporarily complicates the viability of a direct military attack by Beijing. Thus, Taiwan's silicon shield is not just an economic factor, it is one of the key elements of the island's strategic security. As long as Taiwan remains the global center of semiconductor production, its importance to the global economy will continue to function as a barrier, making the island's stability of interest not only to the West but also to China. However, with tensions rising and technological advancements accelerating, the question remains how long this economic shield will be enough to ensure peace in the region. A Chinese invasion of Taiwan would be one of the greatest military challenges in modern history, and many analysts believe such an operation would involve the largest amphibious assault since D-Day, the Allied landing in Normandy in 1944 during World War II. However, unlike Normandy, Taiwan's geography, defenses, and military tactics make this kind of operation extremely difficult and risky. Taiwan is well aware of its vulnerable position and has been preparing for a potential attack for decades. The island's coastal defenses are highly fortified, particularly along the few beaches that could be used for amphibious landings. Much of Taiwan's coastline is made up of cliffs and rugged terrain, limiting the landing areas to a few specific beaches, all of which are heavily armed and prepared for an invasion. These beaches are filled with landmines, fortifications, and anti-ship missile systems, making any invasion attempt extremely dangerous for attacking forces. In addition to coastal defenses, Taiwan has positioned its main airbases and supply centers in the east, mountainous region less accessible for a maritime invasion. This strategic positioning ensures that even if Chinese forces manage to land on the western beaches, Taiwan's military can continue resisting and coordinating operations from more secure inland bases. Eastern Taiwan is protected by the island's central mountains, which create a natural barrier that would be difficult for any invading force to penetrate. From these bases, Taiwan can operate its air force, resupply troops, and launch counterattacks, prolonging the conflict and raising the costs for China. If the beach defenses and air control are compromised, Taiwan has another strategy in mind: guerrilla warfare. The island's mountainous interior, especially in the east, provides an ideal landscape for troops and trained civilians to mount a prolonged resistance against occupying forces. Taiwan has been training its reserve forces and civilians so that if an amphibious invasion succeeds on the beaches, they can retreat to the mountains and wage guerrilla warfare, similar to what was seen in previous conflicts like the Vietnam War. The mountainous terrain favors this type of resistance, making it difficult for invading forces, who would face ambushes and surprise attacks. Beyond its ground defenses, Taiwan has invested in asymmetric strategies, using cutting-edge technology to counter China's superior military power. The use of long-range missiles, drones, and integrated air defense systems is part of this defensive plan. The strategy is clear: make the initial invasion as difficult as possible, and if that fails, prolong the conflict until international help, especially from the United States, can intervene. However, the challenges extend beyond Taiwan's geography and defenses. A large-scale amphibious operation requires complex military coordination. China would need to transport hundreds of thousands of soldiers across the Taiwan Strait, a highly monitored and patrolled stretch of water. This would involve massive logistics, including deploying troops, tanks, armored vehicles, and supplies, all under the threat of air and naval attacks. A miscalculation or logistical failure could lead to enormous casualties for Chinese forces, turning the operation into a disaster. Moreover, there's the issue of international public opinion and potential economic sanctions. An invasion of Taiwan would trigger an immediate diplomatic and economic response from much of the world, especially the West. This could isolate China and potentially lead to a global economic crisis, severely impacting its own economy, which still relies on a relatively stable world order to sustain its growth. While Taiwan has prepared militarily and economically to deter a Chinese invasion, it faces a critical vulnerability: its near-total dependence on energy imports. Currently, Taiwan imports 97% of all the energy it consumes, putting it in an extremely fragile position in the event of a prolonged conflict or a naval blockade. This makes energy one of the island's biggest challenges, both for keeping its economy running and for maintaining its military defenses in times of crisis. Aware of this dependence, China could opt for a naval blockade as a way to weaken Taiwan without immediately resorting to a full-scale invasion. The Taiwan Strait, through which the island's main trade and supply routes pass, is vital for its oil and natural gas supply. A blockade would quickly disrupt the fuel flow, impacting both the economy and Taiwan's defense capabilities. In a prolonged blockade scenario, the impact would be devastating, not only for the civilian population but also for the armed forces, which rely on fossil fuels to operate their vehicles, planes, and ships. This energy dependence is even more critical because of the importance of the semiconductor industry. TSMC and other Taiwanese tech companies are crucial to the global economy, but they are also highly energy-intensive. Semiconductor production, especially the most advanced chips, consumes vast amounts of electricity. In fact, TSMC alone accounts for over 6% of Taiwan's total energy consumption. This means that in times of energy shortages or supply interruptions, semiconductor production could be severely affected, which would not only hurt Taiwan's economy but also have global repercussions, as the world depends on the island's chip production. In addition to energy supplies, Taiwan also faces challenges in sourcing fossil fuels and natural gas, which are essential for keeping its power plants running. Most of the natural gas used to generate electricity is imported, primarily via tankers. In the event of a blockade or conflict, these tankers could not reach the country, and Taiwan would have to rely on limited reserves that would quickly run out. A disruption in energy supplies would not only affect the daily lives of Taiwanese people but also cripple the island's defense capabilities, as the operation of modern military equipment depends on a stable energy supply. Taiwan has been working to reduce this vulnerability by investing in renewable energy sources like solar and wind power. However, these sources still make up only a small portion of the country's energy mix and would not be enough to replace imports in a crisis scenario. Additionally, Taiwan's nuclear power plants, which historically helped mitigate some of this energy dependence, are being gradually decommissioned due to safety concerns, leaving the country even more exposed. In the face of growing threats of a Chinese invasion, Taiwan, aside from its diplomatic, economic, and military strategies, has an extreme option that, while not an official policy, is considered a possible deterrent tactic: the ability to strike China's Three Gorges Dam, one of the largest engineering projects in the world and a critical piece of Chinese infrastructure. The Three Gorges Dam, located on the Yangtze River, is the world's largest hydroelectric plant and a symbol of China's power and progress. However, the dam is also seen as a potential vulnerability. In the event of a successful attack, the partial or total destruction of the dam could trigger catastrophic flooding, devastating key industrial cities in eastern China, such as Wuhan, Nanjing, and even Shanghai. The dam's collapse would not only affect millions of people but also critical sectors of China's economy, from industrial production to electricity distribution. The threat of an attack on the dam is seen as a form of strategic deterrence by Taiwan, a kind of last resort, in a scenario where the island faces the brink of total invasion. The logic behind this strategy is that, even if Taiwan lacks the conventional military power to defeat China in a traditional war, it could inflict such severe damage on China's infrastructure and population that the cost of an invasion would become unbearable. This strategy aligns with the classical concept of mutual assured destruction, MAD, similar to the deterrence dynamic that existed between the US and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Taiwan possesses long-range missiles, such as the Sung Fong IIE, capable of hitting targets on the Chinese mainland. While the capacity to directly attack the Three Gorges Dam is highly theoretical, it is widely discussed in military and geopolitical analyses. Additionally, China is aware that, despite its military superiority, the catastrophic impact of a flood caused by the dam's destruction would have devastating consequences for the country's internal stability. This serves as a powerful deterrent against an invasion, especially if Chinese forces encounter a stalemate in the conflict. However, this strategy also poses significant risks for Taiwan. An attack on the dam could trigger a massive and devastating response from Beijing. Such an act would be viewed as an extreme escalation, and China would likely retaliate with overwhelming military force to subdue the island. Moreover, the humanitarian consequences of such an attack would be enormous, with millions of Chinese civilians directly affected by the flooding and destruction. This would put Taiwan in a delicate position, as an attack of this magnitude could damage its international reputation and provoke a negative reaction from the global community. Despite not being an official policy, this extreme option is always present in strategic discussions about Taiwan's defense. The mere possibility that Taiwan could strike a target as sensitive as the Three Gorges Dam serves as a deterrent, sending a clear message to Beijing that any attempt at military annexation could have devastating consequences for China itself. The relationship between Taiwan and the United States has been a cornerstone of the island's defense against a potential Chinese invasion. For decades, the U.S. has maintained a policy of indirect support for Taiwan's security, providing arms, military cooperation, and, most importantly, a strategic economic bond. One of the key reasons for this support is Taiwan's central role in the global semiconductor supply chain, which is essential to the U.S. technology industry and the global economy. However, this dynamic may be on the verge of change. In 2022, the United States passed the CHIPS and Science Act, a measure aimed at strengthening domestic semiconductor production and reducing American dependence on foreign suppliers, particularly Taiwan. The law provides for a massive investment of more than $50 billion to incentivize chip manufacturing on U.S. soil, and several companies, including Taiwan's tech giant TSMC, are already opening factories in the U.S. While this measure is positive from the standpoint of American technological security, it could have a significant side effect for Taiwan. The country fears that by bolstering its own semiconductor production, the U.S. might weaken its dependence on Taiwan in this critical area and, consequently, reduce Taiwan's strategic value as the Silicon Shield. The semiconductor industry, as previously mentioned, has functioned as an economic shield protecting Taiwan from a Chinese invasion by making the island indispensable to the global economy and, especially, to U.S. technology. If the U.S. can meet its semiconductor needs domestically, Taiwan fears that this shield might lose its effectiveness. Furthermore, there is concern that this shift could weaken American commitment to defending Taiwan in the event of an invasion. If the U.S. manages to drastically reduce its dependence on Taiwanese chips, its willingness to intervene militarily in a conflict in the Taiwan Strait could diminish. This raises a strategic question in Taiwan. To what extent is American support based on the island's economic importance, and to what extent is it anchored in long-term commitments to regional security and stability? From the U.S. perspective, the CHIPS and Science Act is designed to mitigate a national security risk. Over-reliance on a single country, especially one as vulnerable as Taiwan, has become a concern for Washington as tensions with China rise. While Taiwan is a close ally, the U.S. recognizes that the concentration of semiconductor production in such a geopolitically tense region poses both economic and strategic risks. The goal is that by increasing domestic chip production, the U.S. can ensure a continuous supply of critical technology, even in the event of conflict in the Taiwan Strait. On the other hand, Taiwan is seeking ways to reaffirm its strategic importance to the U.S. and the world, even as its exclusivity as a semiconductor supplier may be reduced. The island remains a leader in high-tech chips, with TSMC dominating the production of the world's most advanced semiconductors, which are essential for emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence and quantum computing. These advanced chips are still extremely difficult to manufacture, and even with U.S. efforts to boost domestic production, Taiwan remains at the forefront of this cutting-edge technology. Nevertheless, the concern in Taiwan is palpable. The shifting global economic balance in the semiconductor sector could alter the alliance dynamics that have been one of the foundations of Taiwan's defense against China. The fear is that as the US and other countries like Japan and the European Union become more self-sufficient in semiconductors, Taiwan's strategic value could be diluted, potentially influencing the level of US engagement in a potential confrontation with China. Over the years, Taiwan has built its deterrence strategies based on three pillars: diplomacy, economic strength, particularly through its semiconductor sector, and military defense. However, the global landscape is changing rapidly. With the CHIPS and Science Act of 2022, the U.S. is strengthening its domestic semiconductor production, which could weaken the reliance on Taiwanese chips and potentially reduce the island's strategic value on the global stage. This leaves Taiwan in a position of uncertainty, as its silicon shield, which has served as an economic barrier against a Chinese invasion, may lose some of its effectiveness as the U.S. becomes more self-sufficient in this sector. Even so, Taiwan continues to prepare for a possible Chinese invasion, while seeking to reaffirm its strategic importance to the West. This preparation involves not only strengthening its military defenses and diplomatic alliances but also adapting to a new technological and economic reality. Taiwan finds itself in a position of great vulnerability and uncertainty, facing the constant threat of a possible invasion by China. To protect itself, the island continues to invest in a multifaceted approach that combines diplomacy, economic strength, particularly through the silicon shield, and military defense. Each of these strategies aims to raise the costs of an invasion while ensuring international support, especially from the United States. However, Taiwan's future remains uncertain. With China's rapid military growth and the U.S. efforts to strengthen its own semiconductor production, the balance of power in the region is shifting. Taiwan is aware that its strategic value may be redefined as the global technological equilibrium changes. Despite this, the island continues to prepare for the worst, strengthening its defenses and seeking alliances that could ensure its survival in a confrontation scenario. Meanwhile, both the United States and China are strategically positioning themselves for a potential conflict, each testing the limits of influence and power in the region. Both know that a war over Taiwan would have profound global consequences, affecting the economy, security, and international relations in irreversible ways. However, what remains in question is whether this conflict is inevitable or if deterrence and the balance of power will be enough to maintain peace. Thus, Taiwan finds itself at the center of a global dispute, where the events of the coming years may define not only the island's future but also the geopolitical order of the 21st century.